What is up, guys? It's Destava here, and welcome to my optics guide. Now, this guide is not going to be, how do I mount this scope guide. This guide is going to be me showing you every single scope in the game as of this moment, and I'm going to be showing you what they look like and where to get them. Now, to start off this guide, I've put myself in a spot where I can pretty much show you guys all of the scopes properly, how they zoom, how far you can see with the scopes, etc. So I've went to customs and I've went to stand on this fallen train cart so I can show you the scopes properly. So first off, we have the Burris Fastfire 3 Reflex Sight. Now, do mind that this is kind of a two-piece scope, so you're gonna have to get the reflex sight itself, and then you're gonna have to get the base. You can put it on the base, and then you can put it on your weapon. So this scope is pretty much your basic red dot. However, I feel like it's not meant to be your main red dot, because it obviously the dot is very big, and at short ranges, sure, you can probably aim pretty well with this, but in long ranges, like long to medium ranges, I can't really see where I'm aiming with this. It's going to be a bit inaccurate on longer ranges, but on short range it's fine, and that's why it's probably more used as a kind of a backup sight. Put my ACOG on. I can actually cycle in between my ACOG and the small sight, so that's why it's probably mostly used as a backup sight, so that if I have a big scope, obviously on short ranges that's going to be a bit difficult to aim, so I can hit control right mouse and I can switch over to my small scope. Now, sometimes the big scope might clip through your screen a bit, but that's all good, it's not going to affect anything. Alright, on to the next scope. Now, the next scope is going to be the Leupold Deltapoint Reflex Sight. Now, same story, it's also made of two parts, it's the scope and the base. So let's actually put the scope on, and I feel like this is kind of the same story as the other one. It's probably not meant to be your main red dot scope, because again the dot is pretty big. It's probably best when used in combination with a different scope. Alright, and onto the next one now. This is the Trijicon RMR, which same story as the last two scopes, made up of two parts. You're going to need the mount, and you're going to need the scope itself. I've actually got a high mount here, so it's going to be set a bit higher than the other scopes. And as you can see, it's the same story as the other two. This one's a bit nicer in my opinion. It's got a little triangle and it's a bit more clear what you can see. However, it's still going to be pretty bad at medium to long range. Alright, and on to the next one. Now, the next one is going to be the OKP 7. It's a red dot. I think you can call it a red dot. It's kind of a reflex slash red dot. It's a bit nicer than the other three red dots I just showed you guys. I still wouldn't use it as a main red dot because I don't really like the reticle, but if you're into that, then obviously it's going to be a good sight for you. Now, there's actually another version of the OKP 7 Reflex Sight. There's the standard version, and there's the version that has the dovetail mount on it. Now, you cannot mount this on your standard M4 or anything. I brought an AKMN with me into the raid that I can mount it on because it has the side mount. It's actually a little bit different than the other OKP 7. This one's actually green. It has a green reticle. I actually kind of like this one, because it shows you pretty clearly where it's going to fire, and it's actually pretty decent at medium range encounters. So I wouldn't recommend using this one. The other one, not so much. I don't like it that much, but it's obviously it's up to you to make that decision. On to the next one. It is the Cobra EKP 818 Reflex Sight. Let's put that on the M4 so that I can show you it. And this sight, it's all right. I would say it's pretty. You're gonna have to put this on full screen to even see this reticle here. There's several modes on this sight. So if you hold down the Alt key and press right mouse button, you can cycle through the modes that this optic has. Now, it has the really small red dot, which even I am having trouble seeing at long range. So for long range, I wouldn't recommend it. Medium range, maybe, because I can kind of see where I'm shooting. If you were to use this, however, I would recommend using this mode, which kind of gives you a little bit more detail as to where you are shooting. And obviously, we've got this mode as well, if you like that. and this one. It's obviously it's personal preference, but that's a good thing that this scope has multiple modes. And on to the next one. This is the Belomo PK6 Reflex Sight. Now, this is actually one of my favorite sights, but not as a main red dot. As you can see, it actually looks quite nice on medium and long range. You can see pretty clearly where you're going to be shooting, and it has multiple modes as well. However, I prefer to have this scope on my backup mount, purely because it's so much more clear than the other kind of backup mount scopes. So as you can see, this is pretty clear, even at long distances. So if I were to have like a big scope, this would be perfect, because I could also use this at medium range engagements. Alright, and on to the next one. Now, the next one is going to be the Aimpoint Micro T1 Reflex Sight. Now, I can't actually show you guys this sight as like an item box, because I can't take it off the mount. So this is, you need a mount and you need the sight. Now let's put it on the M4 so that I can show you guys. Now, it's an alright red dot. I personally wouldn't use it, however, purely because, one, I can't change modes. Second, it has a very thick edge, so if you're looking through it, you can't actually, on long range, it's really difficult to see anyone from the edges of the scope. Plus, the glass that this sight uses actually makes it really hard to see in like dark corridors, etc. It's gonna be very vague. You're gonna have a very vague sight when it's dark. Right, and on to the next one. Now, this is going to be the Pilad Weaver Reflex Sight. This is actually my favorite red dot in the entire game, purely because it's a very clear red dot. I use this as my main red dot all the time. It's just a very nice looking red dot. It looks nice in your weapon. It's really good optic. You can see it pretty clearly from long distances, and you can change modes with it as well. Plus, it has a very thin edge. So it's very, you can very easily see people walking even though they are in the edge of your kind of red dot. It's very thin, so it's very easy to see. So yeah, this is my favorite red dot. Now on to the next one, which is actually a big contender for my favorite red dot. I see a lot of people, or I hear a lot of people saying that this is actually their favorite red dot. This is actually the Walter MRS Reflex Sight. Now, I would say it's kind of the same as the Weaver sight that I just showed you guys. You can change modes with it. It's got pretty much the same modes, except it's got this reticle, which I can see why people think this is a very nice reticle. It's very clear on long ranges and long distances as well. If this is your favorite red dot, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I like using it. It's just a good red dot. On to the next one. Now, this is the Eotech 553 Holographic Sight. And let's put that on my M4. Now, this is a very weird sight, purely because the glass used in this sight makes it very hard to see the actual reticle of the scope, especially in dark corridors. So like, you can see it pretty clearly here, but as soon as I start looking places where it's a bit misty, it's going to get really vague, and it does the same in dark corridors. So I personally wouldn't recommend this scope, purely because of that, because when you're actually looking for the enemy through your scope, you're not going to have a good time. The next one is the Eotech XP-S30 Holographic Sight, which is also a holographic sight. Now, this one, it has the same issue as the last one I showed you. Again, it's going to be very vague because of the glass used. It's a lot more of a thick glass than the red dots are. So it's going to be, it's going to be more vague the more you walk through dark corridors or when you're trying to aim through mist. On to the next one. This is the Eotech XPS32 Holographic Sight. Let's put that on real quick. And again, same issue. I'm not sure what's different in between these hollows. Maybe the reticles are a bit more different. Maybe one is brighter than the other one. But again, I wouldn't use it because it has the same issues as the other holographics, which means glass is too thick. You're not going to be able to see through in different circumstances. And on to the next one. Now, this is the Vortex Razor Holographic Sight. And this is personally my favorite holographic. Because it has a very clear... because it has a very clear glass. It's a tiny bit, yes, it's a tiny bit more misty than the red dot, but it's furthermore it has a very clear sight. I personally love the reticle, so I often use this on a lot of my weapons, just because it's very clear. The edges are a little bit thick, but not as thick as the other as the Aimpoint Micro, because those edges were really thick. I kind of like this holographic. It's a nice one to use. Alright, the next one is going to be the Trijicon RMR thermal rifle scope. Now, this scope is quite special. This is a thermal scope, so this means that it's actually in a digital scope. It's got a camera inside that kind of records thermally. You can switch modes. You can change it to dark mode or light mode. Now, either way, whatever you do, the enemies are going to show up in a different color. So if I've got it on black mode, the enemies will appear white, and this allows me to actually look through trees, look through not obstacles, but it'll allow me to look through trees or like thin foliage. And it's going to do the same in the light mode. The enemies are going to show up dark. I prefer the light or the dark mode personally, so that the enemies prefer appear light. It kind of just makes it easier to see, in my opinion, but it's completely up to you. I've never actually tried this scope in combat because it is really expensive scope. I believe it is around 500,000 rubles, which in this game is very expensive. So I haven't actually used it yet, but it might be a nice one to use. Alright, so next up we've got a very popular one, which is the ACOG. Now, the ACOG zooms in 3.5 times, and it's actually quite a nice scope. You can see pretty clearly at long to medium ranges. It's going to be a bit more difficult on close range, obviously, because you're going to have to move a lot more and you can't really see what's close to you because it zooms in so much. But it's definitely a nice scope to use at long ranges. Now, something I have to tell you about this scope, and that is that the ACOG, when put on, is not zeroed correctly. It'll reset itself to 50 meters in every raid, and you have to actually manually put it up to 150 in each raid to actually make the bullets hit the tip of the triangle. If you don't do this, the bullets are going to hit about around the center or even the bottom of the triangle, depending on how far you're shooting. So make sure to keep that in mind, and you have to reset this every single raid. Now, here's a quick tip that you can use with the ACOG. If you grab the Trijicon RMR and you have the Trijicon RMR round for ACOG scopes, you can put this on and you can add that to your ACOG. So you will actually have a backup mount on top of your ACOG. Which I think personally is very nice, cause so then you can just kind of switch in between both of them, and it won't actually make your gun go to the right. So if I were to put another scope, so that if I were to put another scope on the side, it would actually cycle between those three, but I would prefer to have the scope just on the top and not on the side. That's just personal preference. Next up is the PSO 1. Now, this is probably one of the most used optics on the game. It has a side mount. You can mount it very easily on the SKS or the AKMN. And it's actually a very clear sight. It has a 4x zoom, which is a little bit more than the ACOG. Personally, it's just a very nice scope. You know, you can zoom in pretty well on pretty much everything. However, it's going to be a bit difficult from close range. That's why I suggest you have a backup mount when using this scope. However, you can't put a backup scope on top. You're gonna have to put it on the side, like pretty much with every other sight. Up next, we have the Elcan Spectre 1x/4x. Now you can mount this scope. I could have mounted this on the M4. I just had the AK in my hand, so I mounted it on the AK. Now this scope is pretty special because you can switch between two modes. You can switch it between scoping in long range and scoping in through this little iron sight at the top. But you can also swap the zoom from 4x to 1x by holding down Alt and pressing right mouse. This is pretty useful. The sight tends to bug out somehow with how close you hold the scope to your face. So if I was to switch it and then switch it back, it would go away further, but then if I were to switch my weapon again, I would hold it close to my eye again. It's a bit weird. I'm not sure which one is the correct one, but it's nice that you can change between 4x zoom and 1x zoom, and you've got a built-in iron sight at the top, so that's all quite nice. Up next, we have the Leupold Mark IV hammer, which I also have a Leupold Deltapoint Reflex Sight on top of, and I'll show you what that looks like. So basically, it's a 4x zoom, just like the other scopes we've just seen. It's quite a clear sight. It's a pretty nice scope to look at as well. It's a nice reticle. Reminds me a little bit of a sniper scope, which it sometimes is used as. When you press Control right mouse, you can switch to the little delta point you've got on top. But be aware that the red dot that's on top doesn't come with the scope. You have to actually put that on yourself. And this is the only red dot that actually can be fitted on the hammer. But it's a pretty nice scope because, again, the red dot's on top, which in my opinion is nicer than having it on the side. So all in all, it's a pretty good scope. You hold it pretty close to your eye, which allows you to see pretty clearly. And it's also very nice as a sniper scope. Next up, we have got the SIG BRAVO4. Now, this is also a 4x scope. This is one of my favorite 4x scopes. It zooms in pretty clearly, just like, you know, the hammer does. It's kind of similar to the hammer as well. The reticle is pretty similar. It's also pretty similar. Plus, you can put the Belomo PK06 on top as well, so that you can switch to your red dot quite quickly. I mean, there's not a lot of difference between the hammer and the Bravo. It's probably kind of what reticle you just think is nicer, or what you think looks nicer on your gun. Personally, I prefer the hammer for the reticle, and I prefer the Bravo 4 for how it looks. So next up is the Hensoldt FF3 12x scope. Now, this scope is probably used as a sniper scope. That's obviously what it looks like as well. It's got a 12x magnification, so it can zoom in pretty far. However, I wouldn't use it on an assault rifle. It zooms in a little bit too far for me. I would just go for the medium range scopes, you know, the 4x zoom, the hammer, the Bravo. That fits a bit better with the assault rifles. However, on a sniper, I can see this being used. It's a very nice scope. It's a bit expensive. It's about 70k at skier max level. So it'll take a while to get, but it's a very nice scope to use. You can't change the reticle or anything. But I don't feel like that's needed either. Next up, we have the Optical Scope March Tactical Free 24x zoom scope. Now, this scope actually needs a mount as well, so I've got the 30mm ring mount, so I can actually mount it on my M4. Now, this scope is going to zoom amazingly far. It's 24x magnification. It's a bit too much magnification for me personally. If you do enjoy having a very large scope on your sniper rifle, then by all means, but personally I wouldn't use it. Alright, and the next scope is going to be the Leupold Mark IV 20x rifle scope. I'm actually going to need the ring mount real quick so I can put that on. So this is going to be a 20x zoom. Whoa. Right, it could still be pretty big, just like the other scope I just showed you. Again, I wouldn't really use it at all, not even on a sniper rifle, because it's just going to be too long range for me. Now, up next we have the NSPU-M night scope. Now, this scope, oh sorry, I'm gonna have to put that there. Now, this scope is going to make your AK very big. It's got to be side mounted, and the sight is almost as big as the gun itself, or at least the barrel. Now, this is actually meant to be a nighttime scope. It was meant to be used at night. That's why I quickly went into a raid that was a little bit earlier on in the day. Now, it's got a pretty big magnification, as you can see. I think it's about 4x or so. You can't actually change any of the modes. Now, in a nighttime raid, is this going to be very useful? Probably not, because everything that you're going to be seeing around the scope that you can now see because it's bright is going to be black. So you're pretty much reducing your vision from your entire screen to this little circle right here. Which I wouldn't recommend, especially since it's so, you know, this zoomed in. I wouldn't use it. I would simply just get a night vision and just work with that instead of working with the scope. Now, I had hoped this to be a little bit better, maybe closer to your eye, so that it could be used as like a cheap night vision, but it can't be because it has this big magnification. Plus, it's really far from your eye, which makes it kind of hard to see. Alright guys, that's going to be it for the guide. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you got a good idea of kind of what scopes are available, and maybe even picked a favorite yourself from watching this guide. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Please make sure to subscribe for more of my guides, and as always, I will see you guys next time.
No more room for hesitation. I'm focused on my destination. I hate to be the one that's always contemplating. I'm worried about my soul, I need some meditation. From always giving more in every situation. That shit get me down, that shit getting through to me. Family in the 7, only thing that's been